Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If you want to improve your playing, join me and thousands of other pickers getting better every day at pegheadnation.com. Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. This is a special episode that is a kind of update of an episode I've done before. Back in 2022, I interviewed Kristina R Gaddy when her wonderful book, Well of Souls, came out in hardback, and we chatted about that. And there's a whole hour of conversation about that book and the hidden history of the banjo and just so much cool stuff in there. So if you haven't heard that, go and listen to that first. That's the episode just before this one. If you've already heard that one, I'd recommend listening to it again anyway. But either way, if you've heard that, listen to this too, and then listen to it once you've heard the first one if you're new to it, because I wanted to revisit the topic with her, because so much has happened in the last 18 months in terms of sort of furthering of conversations about black history in string band music, the origins of the banjo, so much stuff, and also just the fact that Beyonce's album caused such a media storm when Cowboy came out, and Rhiannon Giddens, who wrote the foreword to Well of Souls, plays the banjo on that, and it's just sort of shone a spotlight on this conversation. So I wanted to touch base with Kristina and just see how that had played into all this, and yeah, just catch up really, because we had such a great conversation last time. I wanted to revisit it and sort of celebrate the paperback coming out, because it's a great book and an important book, I think, and just wanted to do something for that. So if you've heard the first one, dive straight into this. If you haven't, I would listen to that before this. It will all make more sense, but either way, I hope you enjoy this. As always, it was a cool conversation to have. Welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along, Kristina Gaddy. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
I really enjoyed the conversation we had about this book when it first came out, and I thought it'd be really cool with a paperback now out, which will give it a bigger audience, just to catch up and have a conversation, because I'm really aware that, you know, when a book is submitted, it takes a long time before it comes out at all. So the gap between the book being written and publication in hardback, and then now a year or, you know, year and a bit more for the paperback, I thought it'd be really cool just to see how the book was received when it first came out.
Yeah, I think that in general, it was really well received. You know, one always hopes when you put anything out in the world that you get, you know, people reading it and responding to it and being interested in it. And, you know, we managed to get a good amount of press for it that was really lots of really kind words. And, you know, and that's on one level. But I was actually talking to another writer who has a book coming out in September, and kind of, you know, what is it that you imagine for your, you know, book when it comes out, and what is it that you want? And I told her, I was like, yeah, it's really nice to get good press and to have, you know, good reviews and that level of people talking about it. But for me, what's actually been more important is to have, you know, kind of a grassroots, people's perspective changing. I did one book event really shortly after the book came out at the Augusta Heritage Center's Old Time Week in Elkins, West Virginia. Well, it wasn't in Elkins, West Virginia, but Augusta's based in Elkins, West Virginia. They were down in Cass, West Virginia. And the director said, you know, as you were giving that presentation about the book, I saw people's consciousness kind of shift as they were listening to what you were saying. And I think that consciousness shift for musicians and for players and people who are really interested in old time bluegrass traditional music, to have them, kind of reconsider what they thought or what they knew. It has been, equally important to me as any bigger, good reviews that the book got. And then also to have, some Black banjo players and especially Black banjo scholars having kind of said that the book has influenced their way of thinking, or that they want to build, on what I wrote. And, to me, that was also a big point of, I want to get all of this information out there, not only for people to have that consciousness shift, but so that this is like the new starting point from which we can go further with our understanding and our research. And, people have told me like, oh, don't you want to research this now? Don't you want to research this now? And my answer is generally, no, I want somebody else to research that. I want somebody else to go in depth on that one subject, or I want, that place or whatever it happens to be, that period in time, that account. I want, I want more of us doing it. I don't want to be the only one, out here who's the banjo expert, if you will.
Well, it reminds me of a couple of things we talked about when I interviewed you. And one of them was this idea that you're adding to the kind of collective knowledge about the banjo, and that your hope was that people would take that up and would add to it and find new things. And so has anything more come to light as a result of that?
Yeah, I mean, one fun thing is the stuff that keeps, coming to the surface. So I think we probably talked about, because I talk about at the very, very end of the book, that a really interesting instrument turned up in Lyon, France, but also through a colleague who I cite in the book, Mary Kate Lingold. She was at a conference in Europe, was talking to a Jamaican Swedish curator who works at the Ethnological Museum in Stockholm. She was telling him about Jamaican banjo history and Jamaican Black Atlantic music and all of these kind of things that they had overlapping interest in. And he says, oh, I think we have a banjo in our collection. And this is, of course, unknown to, Mary Caton, who's done all this Jamaican research, and, to the rest of us who've done all this banjo research. And so, sure enough, there's a very intriguing instrument that is actually a model. So it's about as long as, it's a little bit longer than a pencil, say. It is really tiny, and it looks like a model. But it's another one of these things where the more of this information gets out there, the more, people might have something interesting. And just sharing kind of other information that didn't make it into the book about, the banjo in Appalachia, when that turns up, when that shows up, these instruments, other images that people have come across. So I do think that it, is hopefully slowly having that impact, that more and more turns up, and we can, the more information we have, the more we get to know about the people who played it and their lives.
Well, and I remember you just saying just then about hoping other people would go and research the next bit and will pick up the baton and take it on. And I remember we talked last time about the difficulty of communicating all of this stuff when anybody who witnesses anything views it through a certain lens. Now, part of the problem in the first place was that the people were documenting it through a different cultural lens, and so missed all sorts. And so other people doing this research, even if they cover some of the same ground, will see things. Different people see different things because of the connections that they make through their, own previous research or cultural background or whatever.
Exactly. And that's, one of my big hopes too, is that I've been having some conversations lately about the inherent gatekeeping that happens with archival material, because they, if your goal is to preserve something, where does the line between preservation and protection, where is that line? And if you're, preserving something, then it needs to be climate controlled, and it needs to be secured, and it, needs to have all of these things that allow it to be protected. But at the same time, that protection keeps people out. That's the literal gatekeeping of, this archive is open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, not open on weekends, not open on holidays. And who then is allowed to access it? Who then is allowed to see that material? People who can come from 9 to 5 on a Monday through Friday, maybe don't have to work, have the ability to travel to that archive. And so just tons of problems. That's super problematic. And so, the other thing of being, of in the book, being able to say, this is where this information is, this is where one could access it, and being able to, then disseminate that information and just make it easier to understand. Like, if you're interested in this part, this is where you might go look for it. If you're interested in this is where you might go look. And, to that point, it is a narrative book. I'm telling a story. And so I can't include every single, little thing that I might want to include, in it. And, was recently talking to the fellows in the Oakland Public Conservatory's Black Banjo and Fiddle Fellowship, and talking about kind of some of the naming conventions of the banjo. And I actually do have a spreadsheet that's not done yet, which is why I haven't shared it with anybody. But I have a spreadsheet of, all of the known accounts and the dates and the names, and then, the full transcription of if it's a written account, as much as possible, just because, again, just as you were saying, somebody might read that just as I read some accounts and say, I see something different here than the person who read it before. And so, again, being able to have that information kind of readily accessible to people will hopefully, provide something.
And like the timing of this, completely kind of coincidentally, in terms of people being interested in this as a subject, like Beyonce has just released a record that kind of broke the internet and features Rhiannon Giddens playing the banjo, kind of, the opening of the track that broke the internet. And Rhiannon wrote the foreword to your book. And the idea that, like, for this book now to come out, because publishing is such a weird word. If music was put out in the way that books are put out, and like you could buy a record as a deluxe vinyl edition, and then a year and a half later you could stream it or get a CD. It's like the paperback is the book most people are going to buy, and yet it comes out a long time. So the idea that this mass market version of a book is coming out just after this has happened, it's the perfect sort of time for people being interested in reading more about this, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's, it's one of those things that you can't anticipate at all, and you have, no sense of what's going to happen. Like even just the paperback release, like you don't necessarily know when it's going to happen. Usually it's, within a year or two after the hardback, but that's definitely not guaranteed in any way. And to have it happen, it's such a momentous occasion where, yeah, everybody is talking about, what are the Black contributions, not only to country music, but kind of to traditional American music in general, and how we wouldn't have country music if we didn't have, Black Americans and African Americans and their music that developed into these genres that we have, come to associate with whiteness. So yeah, it really, it is funny that it's coming out. Yes, it's all very fortuitous. But I think it's also one of those things that has been building over time. And, that's also how I view, Well of Souls, is that, it's been building on a body of research, that started at least, in the 1950s with Dina Epstein's work, and kind of like sitting down seriously with some of these archival records. And then, just building and building and building. And so, hopefully there's also been some kind of debate of, whether Beyonce's you know, how far does Beyonce's album go? And you could read a column a day or more from people kind of chiming in on that. But I think that the biggest thing is that it gets this conversation to the front and then allows people to be thinking of it in their own way. You know, maybe challenging the notions that they already had, or just, you know, turning them on to something new, to something interesting that they didn't know before.
Yeah, and that's sort of the general media circus will move on and people will go and find other things to have strong opinions about, that, you know, but it shines a light on a conversation and brings some people to it. And some of those people will linger and deepen that conversation and share the results of what they find. And that can only be a good thing, whatever your opinion is either way. It's an opportunity to kind of talk about a topic, isn't it? You know, something can be flavour of the month for a very short period of time, but the lasting effects, it's like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou in country music, in string band music. And, you know, most of the world moves on the next year and is interested in something else, but some people stay and are passionate and want to investigate. And, you know, those moments of themselves maybe aren't, like you're saying about this growing arc of stuff, those moments might, you know, put a rocket under things briefly, but they're not the thing. They're just, you know, a bit of media attention, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it'd be really interesting to see kind of, because presumably more people will read a paperback than read a hardback. And what the next chapter of this is, you know, it's an ongoing story, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Although it's funny, I was talking to the booksellers at Atomic Books here in Baltimore, where I live, are dear friends, but also promoters of my writing. And so I was talking to them about, we've gotten in your paperbacks, but I think we're going to be getting in more. So, you know, when we get in the rest of them, you can come in and sign them. And I was kind of like, I didn't even, you know, I wasn't like, I know you guys still have hardbacks, so I wasn't sure that you're going to, you know, get in paperbacks. And Rachel, who's the co-owner, was like, no, but there's two different audiences. Like there's a hardback audience and there's a paperback audience. And, you know, goes to show what authors know about bookselling. Cause I'm a consummate hardback book buyer and reader. I really like having hardback books, and of course I will buy something if it's only available in paperback. But if I'm given those two options, I'll go for the hardback book. So I don't know, but I think it is also good. One of the spaces that it's really good for to have paperback is in kind of educational settings, where if somebody's going to, you know, put it on a reading list or put it on a syllabus, that lower price point, easier to haul around. So, yeah.
And talking about the kind of the stuff that's come out of the reception to the book, you mentioned that there's something happening at IBMA World of Bluegrass this year that's related. That sounds really cool.
Yeah. So, and again, I think this is, you know, part of my book, but also bigger than the book, and just these conversations that have been, you know, in earnest happening since 2005, but have really gained, you know, maybe since 2020, maybe that's the date that we can kind of pin a lot of this to. But Anna Klein from IBMA reached out to Lillian Werbin and I as organizers of the Banjo gathering to figure out if there was a way to talk specifically at this year's IBMA conference about the contributions of Black Americans, African Americans to broadly string band music. So not even necessarily just bluegrass, but old time bluegrass, country, you know, moving into kind of trad music in general. And, you know, Lily and I were super excited about it. So we jumped in and started kind of outlining some programming, some panels and showcases that could be really interesting. And, you know, we are still in the planning stages. So we have some firm commitments, some soft commitments. and we're trying to, get all of our ducks in a row, as they say. But what's going to be really exciting is that we're going to have kind of a track that's going to be called the Black String Band Symposium at the IBMA conference, focusing on different aspects of Black American contributions to string band music. So everything from playing to building to research to community organizing, and going to hopefully get in some really wonderful people to talk and share their experiences with that. So we're really looking forward to it. And we'll have more information soon, hopefully kind of in the next couple months.
Cool. Well, that sounds great. Hopefully I'm going to be out at IBMA again this year. I'm going to do my best to get out. Be great to come to some of that. Thanks for talking to me again. It's been a real joy to catch up.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.